Well, welcome to another edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel, where we try our best to talk about everything and anything cannabis, seeing if we can give you enough information so that as you're trying to navigate the space out there, and every single state is different, we know that, but as you're trying to navigate, I want to give you some information so that you make good choices for you and your family when you walk into a dispensary or you walk into some of these adult use, I'm going to call them dispensary or facilities. I want to make sure that you get enough information that you can make a good, discernible, different kind of decision for you and your family. So I'm glad that we're doing this, and I'm glad you tuned in today. And today we're really lucky. We're on location in Florida, Miami, Florida, the home of this weekend's Super Bowl, and have an opportunity to talk with a research professional with a Ph.D. focused in natural products chemistry and pharmacology. He's an experienced analytical and bioanalytical chemist. Dr. Andrew Hall is a chief scientific officer and partner in Green Scientific Labs. Thanks so much for joining us today, sir.
Thank you for having me, Montel.
Absolutely. You know, you got quite a resume for a person in the cannabis space. What did you do before you got in cannabis?
So really my background is, I got a biology and a chemistry degree. After that, I went on to pharma company making controlled substances.
Okay.
From there, I went on to grad school where I went on to get my PhD in natural products chemistry. Ultimately, that's the study of drugs that come from natural sources.
Mm-hmm.
About 70% of drugs originated from a natural source at one point.
Sure thing.
So that really opened my eyes to where drugs come from and how plant-based medicine and even marine organisms can really make a difference in people's lives. After that, learning a little more about that, I wound up moving back up to Massachusetts to do a lot of preclinical drug development to everything.
Again, working for a pharma company?
A contract research organization. Okay. So for what pharmaceutical companies do is they have a big data pack submissions that you need in order to, before you can go into a human. Which shows the safety of the products, the toxicology, whether or not they can mutate things. So I ran studies that were associated with those products. So you can then submit to the FDA, and then these pharma companies can move forward and actually investigate further in humans and show its efficacy and safety from there. Looking, with my love of, my own journey in cannabis in general, I saw a big need for kind of legitimizing the cannabis scape to where it needed to be.
But now let me ask you a question, because this is great that you just explained this. The U.S. government has been researching cannabis in the United States and outside of the United States for now over 40 years. Mm-hmm. Does it really take 40 years to do this? Or have we just been I'm saying honestly, I've just been bullshitting the public, telling them that we've been doing research at the University of Mississippi when we really haven't been doing anything?
I think it's a balance between what the government sets up for traditional drugs and the safety pathways and the regulations that you have for all these things. So I don't think a lot of the industry has had the ability to set up the infrastructure to really study someone's specific formulation or manufacturing techniques.
I'm just talking about just studying the plant. There's been a program in place since the first Papa Bush was president of the United States. And you know this as well as I do, that we've had a program in place where we have the Compassionate Care Act that the first President Bush put in place, where he established the research facility at the University of Mississippi. We have been growing marijuana, testing marijuana for over 40 years. Mm-hmm. And, there are people in this, I'm one of them, that I'm just completely baffled that my taxpayer dollars have gone out every single year, been authorized in a budget every single year. And we are just now getting to a place where we're actually doing valid research. It took the private sector to step in and actually, remember, you know this as well as I do, that the U.S. government did a considerable amount of funding of Raphael Mechoulam in Israel. That was 30 years ago.
I totally agree. But I think the translation that happens with government research, especially at the university level, it's very fundamental. Mm-hmm. So I think you hit on a key point that now that private funding is actually coming in, you're able to now study people's specific products. As a natural products chemist, we study all the chemistry. So when you look at cannabis in general, there's over 160 cannabinoids, and a bunch of other terpenes and other chemistry that all plays a role in every user's experience.
And that's one area that again continues even now. Here we are in 2020, and you can literally go up online right now and read 5 different research papers suggesting that we have 66, 150, 160 plus cannabinoids. Nobody agrees. I'm completely blown away by the fact that, I've been doing a lot of speaking in the last couple of years and saying to people that, we know for a fact that there are well over 160 cannabinoids and phytocannabinoids. We know that. And I've had somebody stand up in the back of a room and raise their hand and say, no, Montel, you're not right. There's only 67. I feel like saying, shut up.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. Why is there such an inconsistency, even with those who are involved? You guys are the researchers and scientists are, some of the smartest people on this planet. Why can't we get that group to even guarantee to agree?
Well, I totally agree with you. I think when you even talk about testing standards and the scientists that are actually getting together, we're now just forming these committees and getting the right people together with the right vision of creating these standardized medicines and actually understanding. We now have the Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, where researchers feel like they're publishing and it's actually impactful research for the people that's visible. So I think the right people are finally entering. The right channels are now being opened for people to actually study their products, how they're working, and you're really trying to tailor fit disease states to these plants and what's going on.
Sure.
I think this plant is beautiful in general. From a natural product standpoint.
That's what brought you from the general pharmaceutical industry over to this industry, right?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and it's, you take the same varietal, it'll actually produce different chemistry depending on both the region, depending on how they cultivate, as well as seasonal variations. Exactly.
Right.
And it becomes a challenge, I think, from a drug perspective. How do you make a consistent product if everybody's doing something differently?
Right.
And I think that's why this regulatory pathway that, certain states are setting up is really being able to allow, consumers like me, and patients like me, moving forward and really being able to access the same product that'll give you the same user experience over and over again.
Okay.
And
I'm looking back in history though, let's go back to, pre-1900, 1930, 31, when, we passed the Marijuana Tax Act. I mean, if we go pre that, people were using cannabinoids and cannabis on a regular basis. They were using hemp on a regular basis.
It was the number one drug.
And there was no, I don't want to say it this way, but, nobody really questioned whether or not they had to get the exact same experience for hundreds of years from the plant that they were consuming, whether they be eating it, whether they were, eating the seeds for protein by itself. We were getting benefits from this plant way back before I feel like, we started down the path of trying to over-science this.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I think in general, ancient Chinese medicine, all the plants out there have really had certain beneficial effects. And I think us as science, I think you might have been naive towards the 30s and moving forward of actually understanding that these single compounds can have a drug effect, but which has now pushed the pharmaceutical industry as big as it has been. But now I think you see everyone as going organic, going, maybe not taking pharmaceuticals and adjusting their diets. And it's the same thing for cannabis. And I think you need to set up a program to regulate, to eliminate, illegal, illicit cannabis, because we've seen people die.
Right. And that's been because of some of the unscrupulous people who have gotten into business trying to see if they can, stretch a product longer, wider than it should be stretched.
Yeah.
So if they just left the plant alone, we probably would not have had those issues.
Exactly. I totally agree. It's people that are trying to stretch the plant, make more margins, but not really look at it from a health and safety standpoint. And that's why you need some framework. But do we need necessarily full clinical trials on this stuff? No, because all you need to know is it's safe.
Right.
At that point, it's not about maybe doing that effect. I think it's up to you and I as the consumer to decide whether or not it's having the effect and being
Sure.
beneficial to our life.
Yeah, I mean, I understand testing to make sure that you get all the deleterious components out, all the things that could do damage that are literally added to the plant, rather than go after trying to micro manage the plant itself. The plant itself has been given, to mankind for now well over 5,000 years, at least the way we've had it written. So clearly there's not much wrong with the plant as long as you don't just start stepping in and screwing around with it.
There's very little low to no toxicological effects. I mean, you look at the only death associated with cannabis, and it was really related to aspergillus, a black mold.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and that's really where I think society and, this not social experiment, but this regulatory framework of what these governments are setting up, it's really critical to, prevent bad players from entering the market. And you see this in pharma companies and everywhere else. It's just, there's a lot more documentation associated with it to prevent those things from happening.
Right. So let's back up a little, go back a little bit. So you shifted over from, again, the biopharma world and shifted in this, and that's what made you decide to, how long has your lab been in place?
So I've been in the industry for a while. I've been in Massachusetts, so we're doing some testing to, for the same safety testing for Massachusetts. But we're also doing some preclinical work. So we're developing programs to actually study what I call the bioavailability. So how much can get into your system, as well as some of those safety. From there, I actually went out to California during the rollout of the different phases of testing. But being Northern California, it's not my style. I came down to Florida, where I got my Ph.D. and to do some research as well at the university. Right. But then with my partners, have now been in business about 1.5 years now.
So Green Scientific has been around about 1.5 years.
Yep.
Here and are you trying to replicate this in other states?
Do it right. I think as an industry, you hear about all these issues with laboratories, right? Right. The discontinuity.
And even here in this state, I mean, I know that there are been issues where people can take the same batch, but then again, it's not necessarily the same batch. I mean, because a lot of people think, if I harvest this one, grow cycle, bag it all up and send it to a laboratory, I've got the same product in the bag. You don't, correct?
Nope, it's not. And that comes down to sampling issues, which is what I think we're working through with the state, as well as protocols to make sure that it's a representative sample, and then it actually is representative of what the end consumer is doing.
Okay. But then again, you'll have a representative sample go out to different labs in this state and come back with different results. Now, how the devil does that happen?
So it kind of comes through multiple issues throughout our system. More mature industries, more regulated industries. I wouldn't say more mature industries.
Sure.
You have certain regulatory bodies that audit your lab, make sure you document everything, and that you're running tests correctly. This industry is at its infancy. So that has allowed us to develop our own methods and validate them through a series of tests that are hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you come to it at the end of the day, to verify that our tests are correct. But that's all internal. Other industries have USP, US Pharmacopoeia, right. ASTM, and now our committees like ASTM D37 have now come together with the right scientists to now start developing the right standards. But the problem when you put a lot of scientists into a room, they tend to argue.
Correct.
Just like government.
Right.
So with that change of there, no standardization, you've created a systemic error that, we are probably within plus or minus % based on our methods. Now, internally, we have to calibrate our instruments and use different standards to verify these things are cross-checked.
And it depends on, just rattle off the different ways that we actually test. We're using gas spectroscopy, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different techniques, and what I call them orthogonal methods, meaning multiple methods for what you're doing. So you have gas chromatography you can use for residual solvents, terpene analysis, as well as you could use it for actually cannabinoid analysis. You have HPLC PDA, which we have for potency analysis. However, you have secondary data that allows you to look at your data even further to actually get more information about it.
Okay.
You have pesticides that you have to analyze for, and that's run through an LCMS instrument as well as a GCMS. That's key because some people try to sell you instruments that can do it all in one, and
they really can't.
They really can't.
Right.
As well as other headspace GCMSs that test for some of the other things, as well as residual solvents and terpenes. And that's key that I have, FIDs, GCFIDs, as well as GCMSs, because not one instrument is better than the other. They all have their pros and cons.
Right.
When you talk about a strictly science standpoint. So it's key with the amount of products that we have out there that we are really tailor fitting our methods to what these products are as well.
And this is part of the difficulty in establishing lab testing nationwide. I mean, we go into all the different states that have now, passed some sort of cannabis law. We let this plane go by. All the different states that have passed some form of cannabis law, then they say, okay, well, I think we ought to test this. But then they just throw their hands up in the air and say, okay, somebody step up and say you've got a lab. Well, the person who has the lab has to go out and buy millions of dollars worth of equipment. If they don't, and they just buy one type of equipment, they're really not testing.
I totally agree. But a laboratory, I think, is really, as a scientist, I think it's really built on your team and their knowledge of these instruments. So I kind of hit on the point of laboratory roll-up strategies and people just buying labs. But if you don't have the right personnel with the right experience for these products and testing, it's not useful.
Right.
You can't have someone just graduate with a degree and then know how to become an expert and run a laboratory.
Right.
It's a lot of sleepless nights, and it's a lot of, to be honest, arguing with clients over preventing bad products from going on, or educating them about, what went wrong in the process. Crushing people's dreams at times, which is, nothing that I like. But
you have the ability to basically, take tonnage of people's product and have them throw it away.
It happens all the time. And, and it's, people crying. It's not that you're really after, it's the end consumer, to make sure that they're not going to die from vitamin E acetate,
right.
All those situations, but you see the right people coming in and really caring now, as opposed to, I think, what California used to originally be with that rec market, where it was naive people and not understanding the control processes and what it means to cultivate large scale via maybe what I had in my dorm room closet,
sure,
up in Rhode Island. But
absolutely, and basically cultivating it that way in smaller scale makes it a little easier to get consistency out of your product, correct?
Much more consistency, but then even from a regulatory standpoint, patient population, it's one person at risk, as opposed to, putting out, some of these companies are making 3,600 liters of distillate at a time.
Right.
That's could be millions of people that could die.
Right.
And that's really the hard part about scaling up and, moving this industry in that movement, I see.
Now let's talk a little bit more about the in-depth way we test. Let's say right now, I find a dispensary, or I find someone here in Florida, and I go buy a product. Am I going to see some sort of a state certificate or state, license or something stamped on the outside of the package that tells me this is okay for me?
So Florida actually, on the 20th, they put in their emergency rules. So all the MMTCs are now actually testing for full compliance. Prior to that, they all were testing to compliance anyway, through the right labs and, seeing what's going on to work out their kinks. And that's the problem. How do you put the cart before the horns? Because you have laboratories that need to, they need to generate revenue, but then you also have, these growers that need to work out their process. It's not really that that easy to do.
Right.
So they've been really rolling out these laws, and everyone's been getting in shape and really working together, but it's some of the most stringent in the country. And I'm very excited to actually see and be a part of this, and, work through these rules as we're going back and forth, and, trying to do things right. It's about good science and good data. That's why I'm here.
Sure.
That's why I put a lot at risk to get here and sacrifice a lot. But, it's really about working through these things to, help everyone at the end of the day.
So again, maybe walk us through some of the easiest mistakes someone can make who is cultivating, 100 acres plot. What's the easiest mistake that they can make? And let's say it's all indoor.
Yeah. So
No,
I mean,
skip the 100. Let's get it down to 20 acres.
it's hygiene protocols, really. I mean, it's really how you operate. Are you standardized processes, humidity controls? It's really understanding things that way. Humans are most likely going to contaminate the plant once you grow up in a clean operation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's making sure people scrub in, they're wearing the right suits, the right cleaning protocols, to make sure it makes its way all the way down. But it's not even just people messing up. What you've seen, and up in California and down in Florida, the state sprays for pesticides to control mosquitoes. These are aerial sprays or ditch sprays. This is carried on over, through the air to your regular food products, but it's also carried on over through the air handling systems into certain grows as well. So now you have the state now also has testing requirements on products that are now going to fail based on their doing, which
would have failed if you tested a grape or a peanut, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So it's all about figuring out how to set up a system, because it's not perfect. My mom's the only one that's ever said I'm perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really about looking at this data and working together. But I think the state has to be at this defensive position, because otherwise the bad players are just going to work all over them, and it's caused a slow rollout towards, the end goal of all recreational and, open access to everybody.
Right.
Relieve the barriers of people having to go to a doctor if they're ashamed or whatnot due to, cultural reasons or whatnot. So it's really interesting in that respect.
Sure. I mean, I kind of go back. It's like, okay, if you go back in the 60s, you didn't hear the issues that you're hearing today. The 70s, we didn't hear about some of these issues that you're hearing about today. And yeah, I mean, like I remember in the 70s, it was mostly Mexican weed, right? That people were bringing into the United States, wrapped in newspapers that had lead, ink in it. And people were smoking it, and you didn't have people getting sick and nobody dying from some sort of lung infection. Now, all of a sudden, we have product that's supposedly clean being grown in facilities that are supposedly as clean as they can possibly be, and people are getting sick.
Yeah, and I think it's really due to large scaling. I think, you talk about the fields, outdoor grows, it's a little bit different, but now it's the scaling and the variety of products. I mean, you weren't back in the 70s going in and getting chocolates that were manufactured large scale, or sodas, or
right.
suppository, or I've seen some weird things. But,
right, sure.
So that's where people are getting these things from. How are they extracting these products? You have novices that used to just take butane bottles and extract
the fact
them.
that we still have people out there actually using. I've been an advocate for trying to ban butane usage in this for the last since I started being an advocate in cannabis, because I mean, if I'm not going to walk outside and stick my mouth around the exhaust pipe of a car, why am I going to suck that same thing into my lungs when I want to smoke something that's just as simple as marijuana? And yet, and then somebody can tell me, well, it's only got 50 parts per billion. But really?
That's what it is.
Really? Or 50 parts per million? Really?
Yeah.
Do you really go to tell me that? Do you know that that's only 50 parts? What if it's 350 parts? And how do we know that 350 parts of butane sucked into my lungs, heated up, isn't going to do some sort of damage? One part.
I think you just hit on a great point. It's that we don't know those things. That's why people have rolled out with all these different craft or new product ideas that will generate a new revenue stream per se, but they're not evaluated.
Right.
A whole plant, like we talked about in the beginning, that it hasn't hurt anyone for thousands of years. Now, as people start developing all these products, I think that's really what these harms are coming from. It's maybe not evil people, but it's unintelligent people working down that pathway. Uninformed. That's a much better way.
Sure.
Developing these products, and that's what happens. That honeycut situation, I don't think anyone maliciously did that. They just saw an opportunity and, ooh, these look similar, let me just put them together.
Right. And you also I saw something that you said that even when it comes to MCT, a lot of people use a lot of MCT oil, especially as thinners and things. But MCT isn't necessarily MCT. So where did you get the MCT from?
Where was it sourced from? How clean was it? Was it contaminated? And that's what I work a lot with. So a lot of the clients I work with, the larger clients, we do a lot of what I call supply chain validation. So it's not just testing your end product, it's testing all your raw material to mitigate the situations and mitigate risks that you can throw away these things before you destroy your entire facility or bring in aspergillus from your milk
Hold on a
carton or
second.
something.
I think we must be right in the flight plan. Just so you know, we are coming to you from southern Florida right now and sitting outside having a really good conversation. It's nice to be outside in nature. But go right back and finish what you were saying.
I was talking about supply chain validation,
Sure.
but it's really making sure that you're not bringing in toxic products from the outside that you're going to add to it that will actually cause that end product to fail and cause issues. So people used to buy, like you said, MCT oil, but you get what you pay for.
Right.
So a lot of these people just buy the cheapest product and not realize that it is dirty or it's contaminated or that's the price. There's heavy metals present.
Right.
That's just the nature of things. The cheap plastic bottle capper that you have for your CBD product.
Right.
That's leached a ton of heavy metals in there.
Correct.
There's a reason why the FDA set up food grade products and food grade plastics and stuff is to help mitigate these issues that have already been seen in the nutraceutical and pharmaceutical world.
Right. Right. But wouldn't you think that that's probably, in the nutraceutical world, that's really the world that this industry should kind of try their best to follow?
I absolutely love that you say that. So the dietary supplements regulated by this law called the Shea Law. And that's also kind of falls into something called GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe. But if you have a supplement or a dietary supplement with a known concentration of, say, CBD in this scenario,
right?
You have to put it through the right safety profile in order to get it through and approved to make your claims. But the problem is the nutraceutical world really hasn't gone down that pathway either. It's lacked a lot of oversight and a lot of regulations.
Okay.
So I think we will move down that pathway, but it's about
creating a new
pathway and a way for people to actually study the pharmacology and actually look at their product specifically and show that they have a good traceable manufacturing process, as well as their product mixed with this MCT oil versus this MCT oil will have that same effect.
Okay.
And that's the next step. But the problem with that Shea law is that whole Epidiolex with the pharma patenting or the pharma of that CBD molecule.
Yes.
Because now you have conflicting laws and regulations associated with it. So now, that's why there's a lot of lawyers and things that are beyond my knowledge base that are trying to figure out how to move that pathway forward.
Well, let me ask you just a basic question. Out of all the extraction processes that are out there, which one do you think will eventually rise to the top? The wheat always rises above the chaff. So, you have out there right now, we have supercritical CO2, we have, cryoethanol, and there's still people out there, I'm telling you, in a lot of these markets out here lying and still using butane. So out of those three, what would you look for yourself as a consumer?
So, first off, I think a lot of people are naive to CO2. CO2, you're able to actually harvest out your terpenes, but post-processing, it's a very fatty mixture, and you wind up using ethanol to now purify it even further. Right. And those crude extracts are actually good for edibles, and you wouldn't really need to refine it further. But then your distillate's clean. But if you look at some of the papers and the research that's out there, and from my natural products background, it's when you take a mixture of compounds at different ratios, it'll have a different effect every time. So like part of what I would love to, what I'm working on through the university is to study these actual different mixtures and ratios to show how its affects. So I think until we have an understanding of what those ratios and those chemistry profiles are with an effect, if you form distillate, you formed a pure compound, you formed an API, a drug. Right. It's not a whole plant mixture. Right. So I went around in a lot of different directions, but it really just depends on that end process. And then if you're going to make, say, fresh pressed rosin, right?
Right.
That's super expensive. You're limited to 100-gram batches. That's not feasible when you're trying to roll out a clean product to everybody. But me, probably distillate, if it was an extraction. But for me, I love my flower.
Sure. Sure.
That's my favorite thing.
Okay. Hey, now I've been and this is now for 20 years. I have been a kief smoker. I literally tried to. I started turning away from flower in 2001, and literally was looking for kief and trying to get real kief, not just scrapings, but real kief. And honestly, mixing those sometimes, I would get a kief from one particular strain and a kief from another strain, and trying to see if I could, back then, 2001, 2, 3, and 4, though, CBD was just being, discussed, I was trying to find a higher CBD concentrate or CBD level in the kief that I was getting. And then I would mix that kief in with something a little bit higher THC so I could finally find that little thing, and then for me, it was just trying to find that sweet spot, and I'd find it. What do you think about kief?
I love kief. I mean, it's all the different consumption methods. And I think, much like most drugs and anything, everyone has their own consumption method that works for them.
Sure.
I'm not a huge fan of edibles.
Right.
It doesn't work for me.
Right.
I just fall asleep, and it's
Right.
not a medicine, or, I'm not really functional at that level.
Right.
Where, if it was a daytime, it's maybe a pen.
Right.
Sort of situation, where then at nighttime it would be the flower. So it all really just depends on those situations.
Right.
And for me, it's some of the higher concentration, like dabs in those situations, is something that's not for me.
Right.
Sort of situation. But it very much is dependent on the user, and that's the same for all drugs. You start on a regular drug medicine, well, let's increase your dose, decrease it until they find that sweet spot, and that's what I think everyone needs to do when they're first experimenting with cannabis. Not just roll one method out. Okay, let me try a couple. Okay, this works for me.
Sure. And now, when it comes to just flower by itself, is the testing methods different for just testing flower than testing a distillate or distillate?
Yes, they all have different, methods and extraction profiles for there. Being distillate, it's way more concentrated. So number one, you're not going to use as much sample. And then also, if you think about homogeneity, you thought about someone testing a batch from here. We're working out mapping plans and statistical analysis to make sure that we are randomly sampling from a field so that it is going to be the right result towards the end. When you talk about the average.
Right. Because if you put 50 plants in a square room, the one in the right corner is going to be different than the one in the left corner.
Yeah. Give me this little nug from right up there. It's going to be totally different from.
Right. And from the top of the plant to the bottom of the plant.
And that's what it is. Even the genetics change in the plant over time from the bottom to the top.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, don't aware of that. Now, let's back up a little bit and talk about broad spectrum there, and I've been, not critical of, but had a conversation with Dr. Gupta, who I think, in some ways we should salute for having turned this industry into something that is being discussed at the every person level by his special, but he also basically misled the public. He misled the public by saying that I found this one chemical called CBD that's the end to all, when we know that CBD isn't the end to all. We now recognize very quickly that, there are so many other, again, let's go with 160 plus, because that's literally the number that I've heard from most scientists around the world, that we've identified now around 160 cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids. And if we go with that number, we know that the original, the godfather of cannabis, Dr. Meshulam, stated unequivocally that no matter what we do in research, we're going to find out that it is an entourage effect that actually is the most viable effect from this plant. And that's mixing all those cannabinoids together, though we may find out down the road that some of them are not as important as others, but you still want to have them there because we don't understand their interaction with the other cannabinoid.
I totally agree with you.
So what do you think about this? We just now, we've discovered, and within the last 3 weeks, there's all this research out there about the fact that they've now discovered, a new THCP, and a CBDP.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also discovered, the fact that there is now a phytocannabinoid that may have some really, really, really powerful effect when it comes to things like pancreatic cancer and also permeation of cancer cell walls. So that kind of brings me back to the idea that, the idea of using the full plant or using the leaf or using the keef is probably more important than going after just the distillate that's only isolating 1 or 2 cannabinoids.
I totally agree with you on that one. So I think even the government had an understanding of this, and then the regulatory pathway with the challenges. So in 2016, the FDA actually released botanical-based drug guidelines, which loosens up the ability for you to actually go through a pathway very, very easier with plant-based extracts. So you can account for these variations in this chemistry. So you can show that your product, when grown the same through a traceable system, will actually prove as drugs. And I think we are now at a point to actually be able to cultivate in the right way and show the right consistent products that'll, show it. I mean, the consistent manufacturing product where if you were to take these products and go through a trial and actually see this, you will see the same results between those studies. Mm-hmm. I think, previously when you talk about the research you've done, say in California and whatnot, the controls in manufacturing haven't been in place, that the variations from the science research would vary because the product would vary so much.
Okay.
So I think now you really do see the big manufacturers that are, making these quality, mixed cannabinoid ratios or full spectrum products, and actually being able to, now study them in a way. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Or
it does. I mean, it's like for me, I have a product that's in the marketplace that I put out that's, when I was one of the very first, I think, in this entire country to literally take distillate and go back and reformulate. So I was taking THC, CBD, and then using a terpene profile that would literally include a lot of the other minor cannabinoids at very, 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 very small levels, but making sure that they were present so that, I have a product in the marketplace that was, I'll give you one example is 25% THC and, 10% THC and 90% CBD, but it really wasn't. That's by volume. It was, 10% THC, about 82% CBD, and about that other 8% was a mixture of all of terpenes and other cannabinoids. And I was specifically picking terpenes that have already been investigated in the food industry as having some form of medicinal effect and adding those in to see if I could elicit a response. And, almost to the letter, I was eliciting a response, at least hearing back feedback from customers saying that, this literally did exactly what I said it was going to do. And I'm really, blown away by the fact that it's like right now, in the last 4 years ago, I was literally stolen to one of my manufacturing partners saying we should really literally look at CBG, starting to add most CBG in the plant. Most people don't know that CBG in the first 6 weeks of the plant is probably the most prevalent cannabinoid. Then it starts to turn into THC and CBD. I said, if you look at it from a stem cell standpoint, if we increased when the fully grown plant, it goes from, like 90% or like 80% down to, somewhere like 0.002%, right? So what if we increased it to like 1%? What would it have on the THC and the CBD that we actually have in the product, in the mixture? And I started dabbling with that and literally noticed a noticeable effect in, not just my high, but noticeable effect in how I felt after using the product. And I don't see a lot of that happening right now. A lot of people are going, well, I want to have a broad spectrum, meaning that I'll go and have a test done to show that everything's present, but they're not messing around with the individual cannabinoids trying to increase that percentage. I don't know.
I love that you actually say that. I think that's the issue in what was that word that you said? Misinformation that's going on. I think you have people that are in it for the wrong reasons, maybe not the wrong reasons, but trying to make products, but don't really understand that standardize their manufacturing process is really what it's all about. Because if you're creating a product and you want a unique user experience to be consistent, everything has to be the same over the time. People are buying broad spectrum CBD from here, different farms, different genetics, different terpene profiles. And now they're never going to have the same product, so you're not really going to create customer loyalty or the same user experience. So you're actually doing a little bit of a disservice for what I think a lot of this movement has gone for, in the sense of, trying to actually understand these things and actually move it in the right direction. I love the fact that you actually make that product, because that's the first step for us to actually understand these things is those entourage effects and these ratios. And if you look at Ethan Russo's paper, the godfather of that entourage effect, you go from ratios here, you'll have more of an effect here, less of an effect down here, and more of an effect. So there's no real number one-to-one ratio that people really understand. And once you add 10 compounds, how do you, that's a big math equation.
That's a big math equation. Absolutely.
And now I think we just need the data, the right people with the right data with not an interest, a good interest in actually understanding it.
Sure. I mean, I think maybe we start off by being consistent in the formulation and then try to test for the effect. I know that sounds a little crazy, but if I can say that I can guarantee you that this particular pen that I have has a oil in it that has consistently, every batch has this actual profile, that at least lets the consumer know, well, every time I grab that particular pen, I should have that same effect from what I just consumed, rather than grab this pen, go back and get another cart. Now that cart's 10% off. And did I really have the same effect? I don't know if I have the same effect. Attitude, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what the issues I think have been in the industry. I think now you make that right effect, and when we talk about the government trying to stop making you through drugs, the biggest disqualification for I see everybody in the market is hitting the mark of good manufacturing, in the sense it's the same product every time going into those trials. And now that people actually have hit that benchmark, people have been able to set up the manufacturing facilities to do that. We're really at that cusp for that next level of product integrity and consumer understanding of products, and really that's going to drive in customer loyalty.
Right.
You getting sticky icky to, I don't know, some of the other crazy names you've heard out there. It's not about that. It's about a good quality brand where you look at the back and it's this. Okay, correct. Next time I go up, it's this, and it doesn't change within a statistical relative degree, because there's always error, I said, but relatively the same product.
And that's gonna require us taking a little bit of a break here from just extracting and trying to extract what we call broad spectrum, but actually extracting to each component 160 different cannabinoids. Extract them each individually and then go back and reformulate them so that you have them at the exact level every single time.
That's exactly what it is. So it's really interesting that you said that, because you see a lot of the good manufacturers with the right team, they're starting to do that. So they're kind of post-extraction actually purifying them out, and then giving you a consistent 5% CBG, 5% CBC, 5% that. Because if you think about your extract, by the time you dilute it down to a tincture, can you measure it or not? At 0.3%, it's almost non-detectable.
Right.
And I'm always in arguments with people that I swear that this is in there, but it's diluted out at that point.
Sure.
And then that's almost misinforming the clients by saying broad spectrum, because it's not the same product between batch and lot, batch and lot to lot variability.
Wow. So where do you think the industry is headed right now?
It's funny that you say it, because I have kind of twofold decision. I really am there for clean, consistent access. Like we started the conversation with the plant's relatively unharmful, right? So it's why are we not releasing the plant to everybody in that direction and regulating the safety testing for pesticides in those situations? But then
I think that's one of the areas that has to be one of the starters, is the fact that we literally are making sure that it doesn't contain contaminants that are harmful.
Mm-hmm. And that's really the starting point. So once you have the plant there, and then you can drive in the manufacturing of all these random products. It's not about developing 100 different, what do they call them, SKUs, right? Different product lines.
Sure.
It's about really driving in one good product and then expanding it that way. You know, and I think you had a really crazy year last year from what I saw. Everyone trying to generate and start a company around CBD and not really drive in what they were trying to make.
Correct. They just want to be first to do a toe fungus bomb. Right? Yeah.
It is. It's the weirdest things I've ever seen. I mean, I blushed at some of the things that I've seen, but you know, it's the next step is really people dialing in their manufacturing, not getting caught up in, you know, just trying to push product out the door, and really dialing in their process. You know, and then at that point you can start evaluating your product and, you know, taking it to the next level. You know, I think the consumers deserve more from what it used to be. And, you know, and I think we're in that right direction. You know, I see you know, some of the top scientists, the highest cited author from American Chemical Society, you know, they're in this scape now. You know, so you see the right people in it for the right reasons. And, you know, like you that, you know, had your passion from your background, me, which is why, you know, it's meant a lot to me and got me through, you know, and, you know, that's really where I think the market's headed.
And now what about how do we bridge this gap in this competitive state to state angst? You know, because you know, one state wants to do something, they say I'm doing it better than that state, and another state wants to do something, I'm doing it better than that state, and they really aren't doing it better than themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the issue. It's you know, it comes down to funding, right? So the government needs the money to set up people in there. They need the right experts. I don't think the right the people that would tend to go into government are the people that would are typically from the cannabis industry to understand those situations. You know, and then it's also rolling out a program that's viable for your market. You know, in Michigan, for instance, you had a caregiver situation, much like California, but how do you change a market within weeks? You know, how do you roll that situation out when there's been a lot of bad practices and no real foundation and knowledge and how to cultivate these things?
Have you seen the Fresh Toast article that's out about the discovery of the THCP?
I did.
You
So
see
the Nature article, yes.
Yeah, the article talks about the fact that, and a lot of people don't know this, but you know, this cannabinoid was discovered at a military laboratory looking at cannabinoids to see if they could weaponize them. And this is a conversation that's been held since almost back in the 50s and the 60s, where, you know, the governments can't look at something and just say it's okay to have, you know, a product. Let's figure out if we can turn it into a weapon that, you know, we can hurt people with. And that's really interesting.
Well, I think from an industry, from a science standpoint, I think you put a lot of the regulated systems on those military bases for research, which is why it was a controlled substance in those situations. Where I think it's how do you start studying it from a framework that didn't allow anybody to study it, and I think that's probably why it went through that university. From a natural products chemist, because that's really ultimately who discovered that. You know, these are in minuscule quantities, so you're talking about huge extracts, and then you know, you're getting a milligram per maybe kilogram of extract. You know, so you're talking about trace, but it allows us to figure out the same structure and what that actual compound looks like. And why I say that is when we talk about cannabinoids, they're kind of a core framework, you know, as far as its chemistry, and there's only slight subtle changes. So when I talk about 160, you might just have an alcohol group here, an alcohol group there. But, you know, once you know that structure and what would traditionally happen in regular pharma, you take that structure and then you'd either synthesize it and then you'd run it through a pharma type pathway. You know, so I think the government has controlled the research, and but keep in mind when we talk about, hey, it's good for anti-cancer, a lot of times the data gets misconstrued as it's on a cell assay. You know, so you haven't given it to someone else and not evaluated to kill someone. And that's how drugs normally get formed. Unfortunately, as an industry here, we already know it's not killing people. And then how do you make something and put it through that pathway? Now it's kind of the cart before the horse. What is it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, cart before horse.
Yeah, cart before the horse situation.
Right.
So, I think you also have universities opening up to actually, my university, they weren't very happy about what I wanted to get into when I was getting my PhD, but now they are open to it.
Sure.
So it's
yeah, finally, universities are starting to actually teach information to doctors about the fact that, we have an endocannabinoid system. I mean, we've just started doing that now. This is 2020, and this is just now happening.
Yeah.
And we've known about the endocannabinoid systems for now 17 years.
Yeah, and now you link all this other research. It's like fish oil, the arachidonic acid, one of the main components in fish oil, that interacts with your endocannabinoid system. So that's really what they link to some of the most beneficial components of that. And now fish oil is actually FDA approved for a drug for anti-heart attack. So it's all linking to understanding how you can't compete with nature. Just in natural synthetic methods.
Hold on 1 second. Got that airplane going over again. But, you're right. We're finally hitting a spot where we're starting to validate the research that's being done, but only doling it out as our government sees fit, I guess is what I want to say, which brings me back to, and I know a lot of people who listen to our conversation now for the last hour are wondering, okay, so Montel, all right, you guys are talking about, research. But again, this is a product that's been around for 5,000 years and has done no harm except for, in one person who we now know consumed a product that was poorly stored, grown, and manipulated to actually cause that black mold.
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10, cannabis doesn't normally form black mold, right?
Actually, and I believe I might be wrong in these statements, but but I believe it was Virginia Tech actually in the 70s inoculated cannabis with Aspergillus niger, a seed sample from the police department, and it didn't grow during incubation. So it's obviously introduced from cultivation facility issues, where then it's spreading on the actual product post growing sort of situation.
Okay. Wow.
So,
wow. So for the consumer out there, okay, can we look at this and think, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that eventually, techniques like what you do at Green Scientific will probably finally start rolling across the country.
And that's what it is. You see how do you roll it out? How do you set the infrastructure? You have the right teams in there. You have the right. I really think it's the scientists in there that truly care. If you care about your job and you like it, you don't have to work a day in your life. But at the other side, it's actually helping create a movement and a knowledge base for other people to get educated and do things right. Everyone, why would you be getting into it when I was first doing it? But now they see the passion. They see what the movement's moving forward. Sure. You have, great people like Switha Qual, out there that, gave up their sweet pharma lifestyle to, join this movement. So
were you as shocked as I was when you heard that Arizona, which has had a robust medical program for years now, never required testing?
So this is the issue that I think you have in different states. So if you have a good manufacturing process and the right documented batch records and your own internal testing program that you have a right independent unit that's checking your systems, you can prevent those products from having those contaminants. So I'm okay with that. However, what you have is a lot of companies that are just trying to push the product out the door. So if it's not meeting the requirements, there's ways to get around it. Right. So as like any company sets up, it's about setting up those policies and procedures to get that way. And the infrastructure just wasn't there. But as you see people die in those situations, that's when these rules are going to come out. The states understand it. These testing requirements are actually minimal when you compare to normal food and agricultural testing. So I actually, when everyone says, I've heard, these are the highest level of testing standards. It's not even food and supplements from other lab owners. And it's just, I laugh because that's just not how it goes. It's just naive people coming to the market that want to set up a lab, but they're not looking about stability testing programs? How do you know that your chocolate still has THC for 6 months after you manufactured it?
Right.
You know, if when you shipped it in Antarctica and it froze to -40, that it's still stable after that point. You know, or you went to the Sahara, I'm giving extreme scenarios,
Sure.
but it melted. Did the CBD disappear?
Right.
You know, and that's really the next level of manufacturing. You know, so yeah, it's interesting. And, you know, I think if someone gets hurt and you get caught with these things in the future, these are now, from a CBD perspective, that's federally liable. You know, you can actually go to court, you can be held for fraud.
Right.
You know, that hasn't been there before.
Right.
So that's kind of convoluted in the testing standard standpoint, but it's all about how do states give people access quickly, and then kind of pull back and start implementing the rules.
Got it.
And why I say that is I think Michigan did an excellent job in that standpoint of giving caregivers access. But now if you look what's going on now, they're really pushing out the caregivers in the sense of letting big manufacturers that are held accountable distribute the products to the market.
Got it.
But then it also squeezes access to the consumers during these transitions. So,
Sure.
you know, how do you get access without an infrastructure at place?
But then a problem also becomes then, you know, the more and more regulation, the stronger and stronger the black market. That's what we've seen in California right now. I mean, the black market is really booming. I think that there's estimates that, you know, the consumption of state, you know, sanctioned products is probably around 30 to 35%, 75 or 65 to 75% of the product in the marketplace right now in California, which is the state that's been leading this charge, is now back in the black market hands, which is crazy.
But I think we got to understand what the legal market was in California. And, you know, I really look at the legal market in California. It's only existed for 2 years.
Right.
You know, it's just licensing. Before it was, I go to my doctor, I get my medical card, I can grow up to a set limit of plants. Based on the caregiver, I can grow more and more plants. So the government didn't have any oversight as far as regulating these companies. You know, California has really now got a government task force where they already have their hands full by just trying to get all these manufacturers that are trying to get compliant, let them get compliant. You know, if you tried to register with the government, you're trying to do it right.
Right.
You know, so now it comes down to all the funding went towards getting these people licensed up and running in these dispensaries. But now you need funding to push these guys out.
Right.
You know, and it's not about your Joe Schmo, you know, growing 3 plants for him and his 2 boys. It's really about distributing, you know, pesticide-laden crops because, you know, PBO and other accelerants, you know, will help you get bigger yield. You know, that's not what it's about.
Right.
You know, so there's really only been a couple of years of regulated testing, you know, and if you look at the other states like Massachusetts and other ones that set up a real regulatory framework with testing and before things rolled out,
Right.
There's not a lot of companies that exist in those markets. Where California, there's tons, you know,
Right.
and now it's been squeezed out and out and out because it's people getting compliant. And the ones that do well have really invested in people from food and agricultural and, you know, regular manufacturing techniques to, you know, really create a good, consistent product.
Got it. Well, I'll tell you, Dr. Andrew Hall has been with us here for this last hour. He's the chief scientific officer for Green Scientific Laboratories. You're going to hear about him because I'm guaranteeing that over the course of the next couple of years, you will be helping to set the standard across the country. And I really applaud you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Anything I can do to help you out, or let me know for sure, because I'd love to be involved.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, you know, thanks so much for tuning in to Let's Be Blunt with Montel, and make sure you tune in to the next edition of Let's Be Blunt.